This week, we began our discussion of development and economic globalization. While most discussions of economic development and globalization focus on formal economic activities, we began by looking at global economics that extend beyond officially sanctioned transactions and interactions, specifically the shadow economy. The shadow economy is defined as any economic activities which are hidden from official authorities for monetary, regulatory, and or institutional reasons. We talked about how the shadow economy can link individual people from very different geocultural locations together in a very personal way. As an example, we spoke of global care chains, which can either be formally recognized or part of the shadow economy. Global care chains are a series of personal links between people across the globe based on the work of caring. It generally impacts women who are hired from poor neighborhoods or developing nations to care for the young, sick, or old in more wealthy neighborhoods or countries. These care chains often have a significant impact on the workers who are providing care, as they often must care for others at the expense of caring for their own families. Then we looked at two economic theories that examine the relationship between development, globalization, and global economies. The first was neoliberalism, which is defined as a set of policies, both economic and political, that promote free markets and discourages but does not eliminate government interaction in the economy. Essentially, neoliberalism is about the promotion of the privatization of the economy. In terms of a free market economy, the idea is that trade, or really any operation of the economy, is in the hands of private rather than public bodies. It's based on the idea that the market's self regulating. So, supply and demand balance out as businesses compete to provide consumers with goods and services. Therefore, there's little need for government interaction. Neoliberalism promotes the downsizing of governments. So you end up with measures such as the privatization of public enterprise. Take, for example, healthcare, which is a public enterprise. Instead of the state regulating healthcare, you would have numerous private insurance companies. Of course, there's a massive push for tax cuts on trade and business, so clearly the government has to be involved in some level, as well as strict control of organized labor, unions are trouble for business, and the reduction of public social spending. We also looked at Immanuel Wallerstein's world system model. This was a macro scale analysis that examined the world as a whole rather than individual nation states. According to this model, all countries are caught up in a larger world system that is characterized by the international division of labor between three different types of capitalist societies: core nations, semi periphery nations, and periphery nations. Core nations are the richest and most powerful nations, and they're able to control world wages as well as monopolize the production of manufactured goods and technology. In contrast, semi periphery nations are more advanced developing nations. So these are places that might have large urban centers, but also vast rural poverty. Core nations often contract work out of these nations and use them as buffers when there's tension between the core and periphery nations. Periphery nations are the poorest and least powerful nations in the world, and they often provide raw material and cheap labor to both the core and the periphery. These nations are often exploited for their resources, to the benefit of both core and semi periphery nations. We'll continue to talk about development and economic globalization next week. But for wrapping up this week, I'd like you to consider the following in your final thoughts post. Each of the theories presented this week critiqued capitalism as a driving force of economic inequality. Do you believe that capitalism promotes or hinders economic growth at a global level? What could be an alternative to global capitalism? And do you believe the alternative would create a more egalitarian society or limit economic growth and promote further inequality?